Prisoners on Our Own Farm, from The Lady Who Fought by Sarah Raal. At the foot of a large ridge, covered in olive trees and broom bushes, lies Olivenfontein, my father's beautiful big farm. The farmhouse, a massive old building with a high stoep, thick walls and large airy rooms, stands majestically surrounded by green trees. Below it lie the extensive farmlands and a wonderful view over the endless plains of the southern Free State. Here I first saw the light of day, and here we lived quietly and peacefully together as a family until the dark clouds of war gathered over our country and in 1899 finally brought a violent and inexorable end to the life we had always known. I remember as if it were yesterday the troubled feelings of fear and anxiety that grew stronger and stronger as the danger approached. Terrifying reports, some true, others not, reached us on a daily basis, creating a mood of uncertainty and apprehension that was evident in my dear mother and father more than anyone else. The happy and carefree atmosphere that had existed in our family circle gave way to a somber air. So things continued until they came to a head one day in the summer of October 1899. What an unforgettable day that was. War was declared and the men had to go. They had to report for duty within 24 hours with horses, saddles, bridles, and rations sufficient for 8 days. The farm was a hive of activity. My dear father, deeply aware of all that was happening, and with a profound understanding of the possible consequences, calmly and efficiently gave instructions to his sons and to the farm labourers. My 4 brothers were called up first. My father was to follow later. Still young and inexperienced, and with only a vague idea of what it all might mean, my brothers seemed excited, even enthusiastic, about what was happening. Saddles and bridles were checked, horses readied, and rifles, cartridges, and clothing put in order. The farmhouse was no less busy. We had much to do, packing clothes and food for my brothers, droewors, biltong, rusks, and other provisions. My mother wandered restlessly from one room to the next, fetching first a pair of socks, then a shirt or some other item, saying, "Child, put this in as well. You might need it." She was unable to talk about the coming war. One minute she would be brave, then the tears of a worried mother would rise unbidden to her eyes, to be wiped away with a corner of her old blue apron. The evening meal passed in uneasy silence. After supper, my father said prayers as usual. He prayed earnestly and at length for the light and guidance during these dark days. The following day, after all preparations were complete, the horses were saddled, and the hour of parting had arrived. One by one, we hugged my brothers tightly and wished them well. Tears rolled freely down my mother's face. She could barely manage to say, "Please be careful, my child." With her apron held in her mouth, she waved them a last goodbye and watched until they disappeared behind the ridge. Then she took my father's arm and returned to the house, to her bedroom, where she could give vent to the anxious thoughts crowding one another in her troubled mind. What would become of them? Would she ever again see her beloved sons, the youngest of whom was only 17? 3 months later, my father was also called up. Only my mother, my youngest brother, a little sister, and I remained on the farm. Father was not gone long, however. Due to his physical condition, he returned just 3 months later. One morning, about a month after my father's return, we awoke to a perfect summer's day. All of nature seemed serenely at peace. Birds were singing in the trees, and a fresh breeze carried the sweet smell of flowers and herbs over the ripe yellow wheat fields. There was no hint of the destruction that was going on throughout the country. The peace and quiet were, however, of short duration. By late afternoon, a column of English troops arrived on our farm and announced to my father their intention to camp overnight. First, the scouts were all over the place. Then the troops arrived, and the peaceful silence of the day was shattered by upheaval and destruction. Their horses, mules, oxen, and other animals were chased into our wheat fields to eat and trample to their heart's delight. And the men took complete control of the house, so that by the following morning it was utterly devastated. It rained during the night, and the next day the wheat fields resembled a mud bath. The animals in the rain had so damaged the fields that there was hardly an ear of wheat left standing. In addition, the yard and the house had been plundered. The soldiers had slaughtered and taken almost all the poultry, not even female turkeys sitting on their eggs being spared, and cutlery and other household goods had been commandeered. I caught one soldier in the act of hiding knives and spoons in his puttees. He was quick to flee the moment he saw me. My father was then called to give account of his movements during the previous months, where he had fought, where the Boers were, and whether any of his sons were still fighting. When they heard that he still had 4 sons on commando, the officer said, "So, they're fighting while you take care of the farm. Well then, we'll take you with us right away." Before we knew what was happening, and without my father being allowed back into the house, or to bid us farewell, we watched him being led away by the officers, with his head lowered, hat in hand, and his bald head in the sun. He turned and called out to us, "Till we meet again." Whatever my mother was thinking, it was clear that she hadn't grasped the situation. It was only after the troops had left and after I had explained things to her that she realized that her husband had been taken captive and that he was probably on his way to a concentration camp. The same troops that took my father also took all our flour and groceries, as we were accused of supplying the Boers with food. We were then given a pass that enabled us to go to Jagersfontein station, 24 miles away, every fortnight, to collect the next fortnight's supply of food. They could not starve us out, however. We were still the fortunate owners of 40 sacks of wheat and 2,000 head of small livestock. Despite the troubles that beset us, a period of relative monotony followed. Very few people were about. There were only women on the neighboring farms, The young men were on commando, and the older men had been sent to camps, which left the women in charge of farming operations. In the absence of the men, the farm labourers became difficult and belligerent, so that we could achieve nothing with them. If things went ever so slightly wrong, they refused to work, or threatened to report us to the English. As a result, the farming deteriorated rapidly. Signs of decay were clearly visible, which in turn caused a mood of distraction and despondency. My mother, who was getting on in years, had lost her former courage. She grieved the days and the weeks away. There was no news. Occasionally we would hear reports of the boys, sometimes disturbing, sometimes reassuring. Thus things continued, always in uncertainty and anxiety. We hardly ever saw a newspaper, and when we did, the news was usually untrue and misleading. Nobody could ride on horseback without the English making inquiries, so we were effectively prisoners on our own farm.